I think the short term should be getting back involved in areas where the previous government had abandoned the world stage. And we've already seen that, to be fair, on the issue of climate change. So some really important things that were stated by the government and saying, you know, we're going to be engaged again in the whole issue of dealing with catastrophic climate change. But also what we've seen in terms of dealing with the issue we were talking about at the panel on the issue of refugees. And so in the short term, I think it's getting back into these areas where the previous government had abandoned the world stage. So that's in the short term. In the long term, I think we really need to be a lot more aspirational. I think a lot more, if I can say, bold in what Canada's role should be. I'm of the opinion it's not just about going back to what Canada had been doing before, but it's about reaching further to where we know there is need. So one issue I'm very excited on is the whole issue of innovation in women, peace and security. Canada actually has some of the best practitioners when it's coming to when you're looking at post-conflict, how to have sustainable peace. And we know that women can play a critical role here. There was a UN resolution that Canada signed on to many years ago, 1325, and subsequent UN resolutions. This is really incredible innovation in terms of the role that can be played by women, how we innovate peacekeeping, which we're traditionally known for, but it's also looking beyond the traditional roles that have been played in the past so that you can have sustainable peace, you have peace building, and you have more emphasis on preventative diplomacy. So I think that, you know, in the longer term, we need to see how Canada can reach beyond just the status quo that we had before, get excited again about what Canada can do, take advantage of the rich resource that we have, and it's called our population, and really invest there because there's so much opportunity. We just have to unleash it.
Canada's number one foreign policy interest always, without exception, is its relationship with the United States. It's our only neighboring country. It's the country with which we have the largest trading relationship. You know, we're bound to them by a free trade agreement. We have all kinds of ties that bind us across the border. Our economies are deeply integrated. And so the short, medium, and long-term priority is always how do we get the best relationship with the United States? Because that relationship weighs more heavily in the balance pretty much than all the other relationships put together. I think on that front, the government's made the right noises. The Prime Minister has been on the phone on a regular basis, I think, with the American president. But of course, President Obama is on his way out. And I think it's an open question how America, just to pick one scenario, America under Republican leadership in the White House would get along with a Trudeau administration in Canada. Is not obvious that that would be a happy relationship. So I think that's something for us to think about. In terms of our relationship with our other allies, the decision to downgrade our combat mission in Syria, I think, has damaged our relations with a number of other foreign allies, France and Britain, to pick that example. These are countries that are increasing their commitment to the mission in Syria, and I think this is an important explanation for the fact that Canada has been recently excluded from some international forums amongst Western powers discussing Middle East strategy. I think the larger Middle Eastern policy of the government is rather in a shambles. I think partly because they feel the need to repudiate the legacy of the Harper government, in spite of the fact that the Harper government couldn't possibly have done everything wrong. And the government needs to be able to embrace the things that the Harper government was doing that were correct, despite the political disagreements at home. And so I think, for example, about Canada's relationship with Russia Canada's relationship with Iran. I've already mentioned the combat mission in Syria. I could mention relations with Israel, which is our only ally and the only Western democratic society under the rule of law in the Middle East. I think on all these fronts, the government is making some unfortunate moves to repudiate what I think were perhaps policies carried to an extreme, but they were the correct direction for Canada to go in. And for Canada to back away from them now, I think, is sending absolutely the wrong signal, both in terms of Canada's interests and the interests of the Western alliance to which we belong.
Well, in terms of policy, I think it's important to introduce some measures that we know will be effective in changing incentives and changing behavior. So that could be either carbon tax, or it could be a cap and trade system. But we need to bring in some measures that change the relative prices to disadvantage heavily greenhouse gas emitting activities. We've tried the other options, such as voluntary action, and they've been really ineffective. And other options such as subsidies are extraordinarily expensive in terms of the amount of carbon reduced. Regulation somewhat less so, but also quite expensive in terms of the reductions. So we need to see the national implementation of economic measures, so either tax or cap and trade.
I think in the long term, specifically on the refugee file, which is what I was invited to speak on today, would be to make sure that our focus is not just on this on a particular crisis, but noticing and really recognizing that this is a global crisis. The refugee crisis didn't start in September, and it won't end when the commitment ends to resettle 50,000 refugees by the end of the year. It's an ongoing crisis that is going to need ongoing attention continually from the government in the long term. In the short term, I think the corollary to this is that as we continue on our path to be a leader in the resettlement effort on the Syrian refugee crisis file, it's important that we don't lose sight of other refugee communities that are here in Canada already. Proposals, for instance, to waive the travel loan for Syrian refugees, but not for others, I think can be misconstrued certainly, and has also been called short-sighted by many. So I think it's important to, in the short term, certainly, to make policy decisions that take into account other groups, that are inclusive, and that really get at the issue comprehensively.
So having concluded the youth and student panel here at the Norman Paterson School of International Affairs, one of the main points was that there are some programs that have been cut or have been discontinued by the Harper government, such as the Junior Professional Officer program with the United Nations. And these programs such as these can give immediate professional experience to youth. In the short term, re-establishing such programs can benefit youth in multiple ways. It can reinvigorate Canada's government staff, it can reinvigorate our connections to the world, and it can re-improve our image, the image of Canada to the rest of the world. Now, long term, this has to be more than just a few programs. It has to be a whole of government approach. It has to be about getting to the root of the problems affecting youth and making sure that these problems are fixed long term.
In terms of short-term objectives, I think just to make sure that Canada just keeps getting its name out there, keep building support, showing that we are a bit different from prior government in terms of what our agenda is and what we want to do. And for more long term, like I said, I'm more interested in economics. So I'm interested to see, with the fall of the dollar right now, what he's going to do in terms of increasing that, how we're going to increase Canada's innovation, how we're going to increase our trade with other countries in order to encourage our own domestic development. And so I think that's probably a big goal, and it's probably what's on a lot of Canadians' minds right now.